Dang, that was such a difficult fight. Glad I don't have to do that again. Ah. Hello everyone, and today we will be looking at the Platinum Trophy for Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. This game is absolute cinema. And if you haven't played it already, you really should. I'd argue this is the best From Software game, and it doesn't even have any dudes in onion armour. Though, if you're quick to anger, be aware it might cost you a few controllers and a monitor. This game has 34 trophies, requires several playthroughs, and takes between 50 and 60 hours to complete, depending on your skill level. So, let's get straight into it. The game opens with the main character, the wolf, sleeping in a well, perhaps after drinking way too much sake. In typical From Software fashion, he is awoken by someone mysteriously dropping something into the well and then disappearing until later in the game. Since he has no weapon, Wolf has to sneak past a bunch of enemies and into the Moonview Tower, where he finds Lord Kuro, who he is supposed to be protecting. Lord Kuro very kindly gives us the Kosabimaru, literally just a big sword, which gives us the Revered Blade trophy. Clearing a path to escape, we proceed out of the tower and fight some pretty easy enemies. We also encounter our first mini-boss, leader Shigenori Yamauchi. If you haven't played this game, basically there are a ton of mini-bosses, like 30 of them. And that doesn't count the main bosses, of whom there are another 17. I know this is kind of dwarfed by Elden Ring's 165, but at the time this was pretty crazy. Anyway, after beating the mini-boss, we head to leave the reservoir and we're stopped by Genichiro Ashina. This is the first of 3 times you fight this guy, and he's equally annoying every time. Like, bro, bring out your grandfather already, sheesh. Anyway, we're supposed to lose this fight, and even if we win it, we lose in a cutscene. So, off with Wolf's arm and on with the game. We wake up in a mysterious temple with a cool new prosthetic arm and official membership of the Cool Robot Limbs gang. Not only that, but we also get the Shinobi prosthetic trophy. The sculptor in the temple that made the prosthetic doesn't really explain much, except for, I must carve the Buddha. So, we might as well go exploring. This is where the game really opens up, so I'm going to skip over most of the open world segments unless something really interesting happens. Basically, we're making our way up to Ashina Castle, and there are a bunch of regular enemies and bosses between us and the castle. At some point along the way, Wolf dies. Thankfully, this game has a mechanic where you get a limited number of revives before returning to a checkpoint, so it's not game over just yet. We get the Resurrection Trophy for returning from the dead for the first time. Before we reach the castle, we also find our first member of the Memorial Mob. Try saying that 5 times fast. Who are a group of merchants in this game. They offer items for Sen, which is the main currency in this game. Finding this one gets us the Memorial Mob achievement for finding one of them. We continue on, and after making our way through a bunch of soldiers, some samurai, and a giant snake, we finally arrive at the first proper boss of the game. I can never remember what his name is though.
My name is Gyobu Masataka Oniwa!
Oh, yeah. That guy. Gyobu isn't really that difficult, especially compared to some bosses later on in the game, though there is still a 20% drop off in trophy completion between him and the start of the game. The main trick is to deflect his big swings and grapple onto him when you get the chance, and also use firecrackers because they scare horses. So long as you can get his posture bar down to 0 twice, he's a piece of cake. For beating him, we get the Gyobu Masataka Oniwa trophy, and we're allowed to proceed towards the castle. But for the next trophy, we need to jump into our DeLorean and go back in time. There's an old woman near the first memorial mob that gives us a spell charm. We can then use this back at the sculptor's temple, and it transports us into Wolf's memories of the Hirata estate. We fight our way through the first mini-bosses, and my favourite is this guy who's clearly a tutorial for the Mercury counter move against thrusting attacks. And eventually we reach the next main boss, Lady Butterfly. She's a lot quicker and spammier than Gyobu, so you'll need quick reactions to win her fight. I also recommend learning when to deflect and when to dodge and when to jump, because otherwise you will be losing a lot of health in this fight. Also, small tip, you can use the shuriken to stab her out of the air whenever she goes on those weird wire things. Anyway, after defeating her, we get the Phantom Lady Butterfly trophy and we're sent back to the present day. Continuing on the castle route we were on earlier, we climb our way up into the castle, fight some more mini-bosses, and get ambushed by some flying dudes. Eventually, we reach the top, and our next main boss is... Okay, to be fair, this Genichiro fight is a lot better than the first one, especially because you can Makiri counter his thrusts now, and at this point of the game, a lot of people say that the combat really clicks for them, so something about it must be right. Anyway, we beat Genichiro properly this time, and he just runs away instead of losing. Of course. Thankfully, we get the Genichiro Ashina trophy for beating him. The next several minutes are mostly a lore dump that I will try to skip over. But basically, Lord Koro wants us to sever his immortality, so we're going to have to go out and do a bunch of chores. We also meet Ishin Ashina, who, despite appearing as a frail old man, is actually the final boss in all 4 endings of this game. He also nicknames us Sekiro, which is a play on words in Japanese meaning one-armed wolf. Anyway, chores. The first requires us to travel to the Senpu Temple on Mount Kongo, and we fight this guy along the way. Getting to the temple itself, we fight now what many people would say is the worst boss in the game, folding screen monkeys. This fight is a puzzle boss, based on the proverb of the 3 wise monkeys: see no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil. So there's a monkey with really good eyesight but poor hearing, a monkey that shouts when it sees you and alerts the other monkeys, and a monkey that can hear you but not see you that well. You'll need to chase the monkeys and use your surroundings to find ways to defeat them. For example, the Hear No Evil monkey can be lured into a room with a loud waterfall, or you can ring a bell next to him so that he gets deafened. There is also an often forgotten 4th monkey, Do No Evil, who funnily enough is invisible and difficult to find if you're not following a guide. This monkey follows you around the entire time and is probably the most annoying one to kill on a first try. But if you're a New Game Plus, or you know how the boss works, you can just turn around and get him right at the start. This boss isn't too hard as far as puzzle bosses go, and it's very much possible to brute force it. Just be careful of the monkey apparitions that inflict terror, as they can very quickly kill you and force you to start all over again. After beating the folding screen monkeys, we get their associated trophy and also the Mortal Blade, which is important for the plot and also has some quite nice skills associated with it. Speaking of skills, we also get the achievement Master of the Arts for maxing out a skill tree. We also come across that massive snake I mentioned earlier, and since we only poked out its eye earlier, we technically didn't defeat it. So we finished the job and are granted the Great Serpent achievement for our troubles. Onto Sunken Valley. And that's right, we're not done with monkey boss fights yet, and it's time to fight Guardian Ape. Guardian Ape is notorious for making people quit this game, and I can see why. His fight requires a lot of quick reactions and knowing when to dodge, run, or deflect. He also has a fake out victory screen, which makes him look like he only has 1 phase, only to get up again and start an even more difficult phase where he inflicts terror with his head and swings a massive sword at you. To make things worse, this isn't even the last time you fight him. Literally the next main boss on the path is a duo version of this boss, where you fight both phases at the same time. But more on this in a sec. We defeat both phases of the Guardian Ape and get his trophy, and also take the Lotus of the Palace for the ritual. Right, back to the duo fight. Did you know that it's fully skippable? well, skippable on a normal playthrough. That boss has a trophy, so I have to do it, unfortunately. But you can entirely ignore it if you do things in a certain order. Basically, if you head to the Poison Swamp area in Sunken Valley and beat Snake Eyes Shirahagi before defeating Guardian Ape, you can just walk past the arena and get to the Sculptor's Idol on the other side, meaning that you can progress past the boss without fighting it. This also means that you can come back to fight the boss whenever you want, which is what I did. This boss sucks, but once you've got the smaller Phase 1 Guardian Ape down, it's pretty straightforward. For beating it, we get the Guardian Ape Immortality Severed trophy. We also get the third of 3 ninjutsu arts for beating the Guardian Ape duo, which gets us the All Ninjutsu Techniques trophy. As well as this, after a little bit of backtracking, we get the All Prosthetic Tools trophy, since the last available one is gained from beating Guardian Ape. Anyway, enough monkeying around. Time to get on with the story. We head through the depths to get to Mibu Village, and we fight our way through to eventually get to the Corrupted Monk Illusion. Despite being a main boss, she is fairly straightforward, and only has 1 health bar. Though we will have to fight the real version of this boss later, who is much harder. We get the Shelter Stone, and now we have the necessary materials to sever Lord Kuro's divine immortality. We head back to Ashina Castle to perform the ritual, but we're greeted by Wolf's adopted father, who we thought was dead, the Great Shinobi Owl. Here, he gives you 2 options: team up with him and break the oath made to Lord Kuro's bloodline, or stay with Kuro and break the Shinobi Code. If you chose the first option, the game basically ends here after 2 of, in my opinion, the most punishing boss fights for a first playthrough. But we're not going to be doing that until New Game Plus. We decide to break the code against Owl's wishes, so he straight up jumps us. Great Shinobi Owl is another pretty difficult boss, especially because he keeps trying to cheese you with those firecrackers and a cloud of anti-healing smoke. If you've got the hang of the game at this point, you probably won't struggle as much with Owl, but if you haven't, then all I can say is good luck. Anyway, we defeat him, and we are granted the Great Shinobi Owl trophy. Returning to Lord Kuro, the ritual fails because we need one final ingredient, the teardrops of the Divine Dragon itself. So we head into the Divine Realm and get the trophy Ashina Traveller for discovering all areas in the game. Pretty quickly after we arrive, we're faced with the true corrupted monk, who has a whopping 3 phases. Phase 1 is pretty much the same as the illusion we've already fought, so it isn't too bad. Phase 2 is similar, but she disappears and summons illusions to attack you, which can be difficult to dodge. However, you can cheese this phase by grappling up onto a branch and then doing an aerial death blow at the right time, skipping the second phase entirely. In Phase 3, the demon centipede thingy comes out and starts spitting terror-inflicting goo at you, which sounds bad, but it actually lets you get quite a few hits if you dodge at the right time. Once you got all 3 phases nailed down, this boss is a bit of a pushover, and shouldn't take too many attempts. Defeating her grants the Corrupted Monk trophy. This grants us access to the Fountainhead Palace, which is where we also can find the final upgrades for our healing flask, giving us the Ultimate Healing Gourd trophy. The next boss, well, kind of a boss. It's a bit complicated. I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically it's a big fish. You can't kill it by normal means, so you have to find 2 specific merchants. One is in Hirata Estate, and the other one is in Fountainhead Palace. They accept treasure carp scales as currency, which can be found throughout the game. Upon trading 7 of them, you can get an item that you can use to poison the fish at a separate area in the Fountainhead Palace. This will then kill the fish and send it upstream to where you first defeated Guardian Ape, where you can loot it and get the Great Coloured Carp trophy. Anyway, fish-related excursions aside, we progress through the Fountainhead Palace and finally reach the Divine Dragon. This is a pretty straightforward boss fight, and it involves killing a few dragon statues and then using a bunch of lightning reversals. We kill it and take its tear to finally get the last component to sever Lord Kuro's divine immortality, as well as the Gracious Gift of Tears trophy. When we return to the Mortal Realm, Ashina Castle is under siege, and there are a few more mini-bosses for us to clean up. I didn't mention this earlier, but mini-bosses drop prayer beads, and 4 prayer beads get you a prayer necklace, which raises your health and posture. We get the last 2 from the bosses in and around the castle, and this gives us the achievement Peak Physical Strength for maxing out our stats. Another thing that I haven't mentioned is that we've unlocked a second version of the Hirata Estate through an NPC questline, which also has a couple of these prayer beads. More importantly, Hirata Estate 2 has a rematch with Owl, who is much harder this time, as he's around the peak of his power. Many people say he's one of the hardest bosses in the game, and I would agree with them, so good luck. That said, he has one of my favourite animations from any Souls-like boss, where he does a thrusting attack and makes a really scared face when you start to Makiri counter, as if he knows what's about to happen to him. Finally, defeating him grants us the Father Surpassed trophy, and also puts us on the path to the Purification ending, which is the first of the 4 endings we'll be getting. Returning to the present once again, it's time to take on the really difficult optional boss that every From Software game seems to have. In this game, it's the Demon of Hatred. Personally, I don't find him as hard as Owl Father, but he's still quite a challenge. He's also got 3 phases, making the fight a bit of a slog, but he's a lot easier to cheese than Owl Father and some later bosses. A common cheese that works for Demon and Gyobu is to get the boss stuck near the cliff and use a number of precise jumps to get out of the arena and make the boss fall off the ledge. This is a lot harder with Gyobu, as he is more likely to get unstuck, making Gyobu skip only relevant for speedruns. Also, this boss has some really interesting lore. He's actually the sculptor in the temple from earlier, who also used to be a one-armed shinobi called Sekiro. There's not enough time to get into this, but it's really interesting, so I recommend taking a look at the wiki. Anyway, defeating him grants us the Demon of Hatred trophy, as well as 2 Lapis Lazuli. We have to use Lapis to max out each prosthetic tool, and we need a total of 10. Unfortunately, this is entirely limited to 6 per new game, with no way to farm it, so you need to get into New Game Plus for the last 4. Anyway, we get the trophy Lazaline upgrade for maxing out one of our prosthetic tools, and it'll be a while until we get the trophy for maxing them all out. We're now at the very end of the first playthrough, so we head into the final boss. The final boss is pretty cool, but unfortunately you have to fight Genichiro again in the first phase. Fortunately, he's quite easy and more of an annoyance than anything. I've seen people say that this phase is the equivalent to the boss run back, and I think I prefer this to walking for 5 minutes only to get insta-killed, so it's not that bad. Anyway, we kick Genichiro's butt again, and he uses the Mortal Blade to resurrect Ishin in his peak form, so thankfully the game is now playable again. The next 3 phases of the fight are all Ishin, and he changes up his moveset in each phase. This fight is really difficult, but honestly my favourite fight in the whole game, and it's a really cool way to end a run. And also, he has a gun, which is super cool. After we defeat Ishin and sever his immortality, we are presented with the options for which ending we want to pick, as well as the trophy Sword Saint Ishin Ashina. Since we went out of our way to fight Owl Father, and I didn't want to fight him in New Game Plus, cause then he would be even harder, we go with the Purification ending and its associated trophy. In this ending, Sekiro performs an alternate version of the ritual in which he sacrifices himself to sever the divine immortality, thus saving Koro's life. This is probably the second best ending. Lord Koro gets to live, and well, you'll see in a minute what the worst ending is. On our second playthrough, we side with Owl, meaning that instead of fighting him and doing the second half of the game, we instead fight Emma and Ishin back to back. This fight absolutely sucks. Similar to Sword Saint Ishin, this fight opens up with Emma the Gentle Blade, who isn't as difficult but still packs a punch, and you have to fight her on every attempt, which makes the fight a whole lot more tedious. After Emma, you have to fight the old man Ishin. Not as powerfully as in the normal ending path, but that means he employs some cheesy tactics against you. Specifically in his third phase, he just starts throwing fire everywhere, which can really disrupt the flow of the fight and get your health down quickly. but if you survive the cheese he throws at you, then you get the trophy Ishin Ashina. At this point I also got the Man Without Equal trophy for defeating all major bosses in the game. And of course, on this path, this is where the game ends, so we get the Shura trophy. In this ending, Sekiro becomes mad with power, stabs Owl in the back, and presumably takes over all of Japan as a mad ruler. Anyway, into New Game Plus 2. Since we cut the last run short, we couldn't get all of the lapis, so we get it here and max out all the prosthetics. This then grants us the trophy, Master of the Prosthetic. We've got 2 more endings to go and therefore 2 more playthroughs. So we're going to start with the more complicated one. The return ending requires you to do a lot of stuff for the Divine Child, who is the person we got the Mortal Blade from, and long story short, she ends up absorbing Lord Kuro and travelling west, presumably to China, with Sekiro to end the dragon's heritage. This is definitely the best ending, because nobody dies, and while it's not as mechanically hard as Purification, there is a bunch of stuff to do, like 15 separate steps. Anyway, doing this ending gets us the trophy Dragon's Homecoming, and puts us into our 4th and final playthrough. The next trophy requires us to get all the skills in the game, which is extremely grindy, since you need to kill enemies for XP. My personal favourite farm for this is in Ashina Outskirts, at the end of the game, where you can stealth kill 5 high level enemies in a row. According to PSN profiles, this method is the second most efficient, but I like it more than the first one. Anyway, after all the grind, we finally get all skills and the trophy Height of Technique. The only thing left to do is get the Immortal Severance ending, which involves killing Lord Kuro to sever the divine immortality. Sekiro then spends the rest of his days carving Buddhas in the sculptor's temple, thus repeating the cycle again. Kind of a bummer ending to the video, but I guess it's a very From Software ending. Anyway, it gives us the Immortal Severance trophy, as well as the Platinum trophy, Sekiro. Overall, this game is really enjoyable, and I'd argue it's one of From Software's finest games. I really hope they return to it one day, but as I'm sure most of you know, Hidetaka Miyazaki does not like sequels very much. I'm going to be putting Sekiro in the S tier of all the 100% videos I've done. I know the S tier is starting to look a bit overcrowded, but I have honestly loved most of the games I've covered on this channel so far. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing as it really helps out the channel. I'll be doing Platinum videos on Destiny 2 and Dark Souls 1 in the next few weeks, so stay tuned for those. And with that, I will say, hesitation is defeat.